You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So I just want to start out right out the gate by saying welcome to all the new subscribers that we have. Of course, the people that are on Twitch, they're not actually going to be able to see this because we're not streaming it live and we're not affiliates on Twitch yet, so we can't upload videos. So we are going to miss our Twitch followers unless, of course, they watch it here on YouTube. But as you guys can see, it's a Monday night, but you know what? We're not live. And unfortunately, we're probably not going to be live for the next few shows. At least this coming Friday and then a week from today, the following Monday. And then the schedule should return to normal. But, you know, work stuff gets in the way. And of course, we didn't want to take the entire Labor Day weekend holiday off here in the U.S., so we wanted to provide you guys with shows. So we're starting out with today. Of course, this thing is premiering. You can watch this and chat along with us as normal. It's just we're not going to actually respond to you unless, of course, one of us is able to pop into the chats, which at least I'm hoping to do while I'm on this job site on Monday night. And hopefully you are too. So
likewise.
Yeah. What we wanted to do today, though, is this is sort of like a follow-up discussion to what we talked about this past Friday, where we reviewed Ahsoka Season 1, at least it's presumably Season 1. I'm assuming they're doing a multi-season show here. But we wanted to talk about the Yuuzhan Vong. And of course, for those of you guys who don't know, the Yuuzhan Vong were just an insane villain that was brought into the expanded universe in the, I think it was a New Jedi Order series or something like that. But it was something like 23 or 24 books, which I read them all. Of course, I read them all a long time ago. But the idea is, should they bring the Yuuzhan Vong into the Ahsoka series? Because they are playing around with Thrawn probably being in the unknown regions. You know, we learned that there's this other galaxy or whatever that he's in. We're assuming. Again, we don't know for sure, but we're assuming it's the unknown regions. And out basically beyond the unknown regions in wild space or whatever, that's where the Yuuzhan Vong start to come into the picture, according to these books. So the idea that we want to pose tonight is, should they actually bring the Yuuzhan Vong in as either the main villain or perhaps another villain that comes in or is introduced at least that they can then bring in? Because the only thing that I would say, just in opening this discussion, is if they bring them in, they have to fully commit. Because that's how it was. This is not the type of like villain of the week kind of thing. I mean, when you bring these guys in, it's a commitment. You have to see it through to whatever. So it's kind of like a better be sure situation. So what are you thinking on this?
You know, this is a tricky one because a lot of people have been kind of talking about it because of, you know, where we are in the timeline, in the sense of they're building the new republic as we speak. Now, if I'm not mistaken, like I said, it's been a while since I've read some of the books regarding the Yuuzhan Vong. I think this is more a little bit deeper after the New Republic has kind of been firmly, you know, in place.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I remember, you know, you had like Han, Luke, and Leia, you know, they had to kind of contend with this. And Luke was bringing up the New Jedi Order because it's just dealing with Jason Solo as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Jason,
Doing
Anakin, Jaina, all of them. I mean,
Yep.
all these characters are pretty well established by the time they brought this out.
Yeah, and so the thing is, it's like, okay, granted, we have Thrawn right now, which is a formidable villain to his own right, you know. So we have that, and they could just leave it at that. Now, what I would think would be cool if they wanted to take Star Wars to the next level, especially film wise, that might be a good thing to do. is if they don't bring it into Ahsoka, or maybe tease it in Ahsoka, but then maybe, let's say, if you're planning on doing another trilogy or something like that, if that's what's on the table, if you're, and especially because you would have to have Luke Skywalker as a part of that. So that means, okay, who are we going with
Uh,
as Luke at that point?
you could have
Because I
Ray.
mean, because
You could
you
have
could
Ray
have Ray,
stand
but
in
it's
for Luke on this one.
but that's just
But you'd have
to me,
to.
it just,
You would have to. See, this is the danger of bringing the
well,
Yuuzhan Vong
yeah,
in.
you're
Be-
absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because if you bring Luke in, that has all this stuff will have to transpire before the First Order.
exactly.
So yeah, and then Luke is gone by the end of the First Order.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're left with Ray.
You have
I
to
think
do
about
Ray
that, but
if you
you're
do
absolutely
this.
right.
Well, I mean, you could. Again, I was gonna say you could maybe sandwich this in that 30-year time period. That there's enough time that the Yuuzhan Vong could come and maybe somehow get conquered or something. But it would leave the galaxy in such a disarray and devastation. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing that's interesting, because this thing started with Vector Prime. That was the first novel that came out um, in this whole New Jedi Order series. And it came out in 1999, I remember. And it ended, I don't remember the year it ended, but like I said, it was like 24 books or something. Because some of them were, this book, part 1, part 2, and part 3. Like they'd have a couple of like two-parters in there. So, you would have a title and it would be like, let me see if I can see. Because I actually have it up. Oh, yeah, like Force Heretic. So there's like Force Heretic, Remnant, Force Heretic, Refugee, Force Heretic, 3. And basically it looks like 2004. So really we're talking like right before episode 3. That's when the last of these books hit. But yeah, you would have to, if you do it with Luke in there, you would have to have that 30-year period. And I'm just afraid, because if you actually look at the way that the galaxy was, by the time these books were over, even by the middle of them, it was really
Mhm.
crazy, because for the expanded universe writers, you couldn't just ignore it and just do another like episode of the week kind of thing, that because whenever they would come up with these major story arcs, the other authors would then adopt those and then fit them into their own story. And usually, because you had things that were fairly contained, you could just tell another story without necessarily heavily referencing the work of other authors, other than borrowing things that, for instance, that Timothy Zahn established. Because he more or less established the expanded. He's kind of the father of the expanded universe. But the problem is, the Yuuzhan Vong, I mean, they created such a problem and created such devastation. It was such a galaxy-wide thing that
Mhm.
you would just have all this leftover stuff, which obviously isn't present in the sequel trilogy. So, yeah, it would almost have to be afterward.
Yeah. And especially if you're going to show the Yuuzhan Vong as they have been depicted in the books. I mean, if they water them down, sure, maybe, but that would do such a disservice to all of us true hardcore Star Wars fans. Um, so I agree with you on that. But I think there will be I think there will be an awesome character, and I think that's probably where they should have. Well, I can't say they could have should have went with that, because the characters Han, Luke, and Leia, if you're going to bring them back in, they're too old to play, to be doing that against the Yuuzhan Vong. Um, at the time when we got the sequel trilogy, I'm speaking of, so they would have had to do this a whole lot sooner in real life, like maybe early, even mid 2000s, maybe.
Yeah,
Like you could have gotten away with it.
there's another option though. They could have still done this at the time that they did the sequel trilogy, but they could have maybe done it to where they were more or less the guides. They were guiding the new characters, because like I said before, you could
Hmm.
you could literally reboot Heir to the
Heir
Empire,
to the
Dark Force
Empire.
Rising, Last Command, basically the Zahn trilogy. You could
Hmm.
reboot that and plug in the new sequel trilogy era characters and substitute them. So Rey could be substituted for Luke, and Poe could be substituted for Han, and Finn could be substituted for, I don't know.
Probably Leia or something like that, just in a
Yeah,
different way.
maybe in a different way. Or maybe Poe substitutes Leia and then Finn substitutes Han. I mean, you could plug them into that storyline without much of a problem. And you can introduce Talon Card, you can introduce Kip Duran, you can introduce, you probably would have to stay away from Mara Jade, but you could come up with somebody else, like a male counterpart that can then fall in love with Rey. I mean, so you could actually redo those stories and then use that as the catalyst to maybe bring the Yuuzhan Vong in, and then you can mirror the storyline.
Yeah. I mean, if they decide to do with a new trilogy with Rey, I mean, I guess you could do with that, and that would be. I mean, since Rey is so powerful anyway, you might as well. I mean, she's the way they're treating her, they're almost treating her like she's a grandmaster at this point anyway. So
Exactly.
even though her lightsaber skills are so shabby and terrible,
Well,
but
and the other option, so there's another thing, and we basically hinted at it on Friday's show because somebody brought it up. They could use the Grisk. The Grisk are new canon people who are very similar in the way they look, the way they act, some of the attributes that they possess. They're very much, at least so far, kind of like what I say are the Yuuzhan Vong stand-ins.
yeah. And for those people who don't know, we probably should explain who the Yuuzhan Vong are a little bit. For those who may not be aware of the books we are referencing and
Well, I have a
some of
picture
their
up here
character
too.
detail. So yeah, the Yuuzhan Vong are these ugly looking things.
Just right out the gate, we're just gonna
Yeah,
insult them. They think we're
hey,
ugly, but that's okay. Whatever.
exactly. But the Yuuzhan Vong are, if you guys are kind of familiar with Star Trek, and we gotta make our Star Trek references, they kind of remind us of the Borg in a way, but instead of being, with a bunch of technological appendages, the Yuuzhan Vong despise technology.
Mm-hmm.
Like it literally makes them angry to see things that's manufactured. They like everything organic. They're like, uh, Whole Foods on steroids. It's just that's these guys. So, um, they're like Eric said, they're kind of outside of the unknown regions. They kind of come in. They have this whole weird culture. Like I said, everything about them is organic. They wear these crab-like um armor that makes them so formidable because blasters can't penetrate them and lightsabers can't really penetrate them except for in certain areas, which is like under the armpits or like by the hip area where the armor is segmented. That's kind of where um, those attacks will work on them. And then the other thing, what makes them really formidable, especially the Jedi, is because they're not really susceptible to the Force. Now, I won't say that they're absent from the Force. Well, they're sort of absent from the Force, but it's almost kind of like how Luke was. If you guys remember the sequel trilogy, when Luke separated himself from the Force, that's them. They're kind of separate from the Force. So Force things don't even really affect them. So if you want to try to Force choke them, that's not really going to work. You could do things like Force lightning, that would affect them. But like even if like Luke Skywalker decided to Force push one of them, and of course Luke being a Grandmaster of the Force, his Force push would be massive. It would only make them stumble just a little bit.
Yeah, they're
So
pretty much completely outside of the Force.
they're
That's the
outside
thing.
of the Force.
I mean,
Yeah, and
the
that's what makes
Force
them
has
so formidable.
no effect on them whatsoever, like zero.
Yeah.
And so,
So the
yes,
Jedi can't sense them at all, and they can't see
can't
if they're
sense them.
lying or. sense of any of that stuff. So the Jedi are at a complete disadvantage when it comes to
Yep. None of their
this
force
life
powers
form.
work. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a complete, yeah. They're just outside of the force. And some people, were into that right away. I mean, Thrawn, of course, in the sequel trilogy that Zahn wrote in the books, he had these creatures called the Ysalamiri, and they basically were like these force bubbles. And if
Mm-hmm.
you had these creatures on you, they look like these little salamander type things. If you had them on
Yeah.
you, then it would pretty much, the force would have no effect on you. You couldn't be felt through the force. It was the same kind of effect. But
Mm-hmm.
this is taking it a step further, is that these particular creatures, the force, they're completely outside of the force. And that's one of the things that, of course, was interesting, because when they started presenting themselves to the New Republic, and at first they were a little on the diplomatic side, and then they turned very quickly. And naturally, the New Republic was like, okay, well, no problem. We'll just send the Jedi in, and that'll be that. And then the Jedi found out very quickly, even somebody as powerful as Luke, that he couldn't even stand against the weakest of these guys. I mean, he had
Mm-hmm.
some combat skills, which of course helped out. And Kip Duran, oddly enough, was probably the most effective against them, because his lightsaber skills were a little bit beyond Luke's by this time. So he was able to fare a little bit better in that sense. But yeah, these guys were just, you know, they had a very, like a this weird, like, they had these different gods, and I mean, it was a very,
Yeah.
ceremonial culture, and everything else. And they were
Yeah.
actually among the favorites of a lot of Star Wars fans, because this is one of the problems that people have had, even with Ahsoka coming in, right? It's like, you need to give us something a little different.
Yeah.
And it's difficult, because on one hand, Star Wars fans will crucify you if you go too far beyond the parameters that establish what Star Wars is. So it's like, you got to give us something new and be different, but not too new and not too different. So, but the Yuuzhan
Right. It's
Vong
finding that
somehow, yeah, they,
the
they
sweet
hit that
spot.
sweet spot. Exactly.
Yeah, because it's kind of like the Superman problem, we've always talked about is when, you've made Superman so powerful that it's like, okay, well, there's pretty much nothing that he can't do. So that's why you have kryptonite. Well, these are kind of like the Jedi's kryptonite in a way, but just in human form, where it's like, okay, what makes them Jedi, makes them powerful, almost makes them ordinary human beings at this point. So now you kind of have to become resourceful and have some ingenuity in order to kind of circumvent their defenses. And that's what makes, those books so interesting. And the fact that these guys are like savages, man. I mean, these guys are just coming in and they're wrecking shop. They're not playing, they're just coming in to destroy. They love pain. Like, it's part of what fuels them. It's almost like a religious thing for them. Like, pain coincides with them being closer to their gods. It's like, okay, well, our God suffered, so we must suffer. And because when we suffer, and that just makes us more powerful. And they have like this whole ritual with the shame ones, where if you they take, organs and stuff from other life forms and adapt it to their bodies. And if it doesn't take, then they're considered a shamed one, and all this kind of crazy stuff. I mean, there's a whole thing. I mean, it's so much on the Yuuzhan Vong, and they're such an interesting and complex character or group of people, um, that I think it would be something that Star Wars fans wouldn't casual Star Wars fans wouldn't be used to, but of course, a hardcore Star Wars fans would be totally about, because we know we've been reading about them for eons now, and just like we have about Thrawn. That's why everybody's so excited that Thrawn is coming to Ahsoka, because we've read all these books. Like Eric said, the whole trilogy. Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, Last Command. So it's like, all right, now and then we finally saw him in Rebels, and we're like, oh, sweet, they're actually putting him in like visual media now.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah,
now we're getting
exactly.
him in live action now. So it's like that next step further. So now we're getting, that thirst quenched a little bit um for our villains. And so then now um we possibly, there's talks about maybe they should have on it. I think that's the way you move Star Wars. I think you have to look at what already works, that fans already have an affection to, and just don't try to screw it up.
Well, and look, one of the things that Star Wars fans, even the casual ones, back in 2012 when Lucasfilm announced the sale and said, "Okay, Disney's going to buy this thing," and Disney had this whole, "Yeah, we're going to make like a movie every year," and all this other stuff that was going to happen, and everybody thought at that time that, well, great. You have this whole expanded universe that you can tap into. It's like the storylines are there. Between the expanded
Mhm.
universe novels and the comics and all that, you really didn't have to try that hard. You had something that was it's almost like just covering a popular song. You it's there. All you have to do is adapt it and make it and like you said, not mess it up.
Mhm.
And you would be fine. But instead, Kathleen Kennedy of course has her agenda. And then on top of that, you also had, well, maybe we want to forge our own way, we want to create our own mythology, that sort of thing. And those two things tied together, quite frankly, are why this franchise is failing. Now, of course, with where the Yuuzhan Vong is concerned, you almost have to ask yourself a couple of questions. The first one, of course, is should the Yuuzhan Vong come into this new canon? Which I think we would both agree, yeah, it would be a good idea to do it. But the second part of that is, should they come into Ahsoka? Because the problem is that,
Yeah.
that might be too small. You alluded to maybe bringing them in through a film or something like that. Another way that you could do it is maybe you start to plant the seeds a little bit in Ahsoka because they are dealing with the unknown regions, obviously. I mean, hopefully a few episodes down the line, I'm not eating my words on that one, but it looks like from all the in-universe hints that we're getting, at least from these first two episodes that we've seen of Ahsoka, it looks like that's where they're going. The Thrawn, and look, it makes sense. The Chiss are in the unknown regions, and
Mhm.
that's the race that Thrawn is, so it would make sense, and that ties in with the Thrawn Ascendancy books a little bit, and I mean, there's just a lot that they can go. Now, I wonder if they're going to bring the character of Eli Vanto in because he factored in heavily. It's funny. He was kind of um the Captain Paleon stand-in for the new canon until the new canon brought in Captain Paleon. So, it's like, okay, now both of them exist, but Vanto is the one who's basically with Thrawn. Well, currently as of then. I don't know exactly where in the timeline all this stuff is going to factor in because Eli was pretty much on a ship at that point and he was, dealing with that. It was almost like a Empire Chiss exchange program. And basically, you have Aralani and you have all these other like really prominent Chiss figures that I also wonder if they're going to bring into this canon. But when you just stick with the Yuuzhan Vong, you could probably plant the seeds. Like they could start talking about this crazy, like signals that they're detecting from wild space, or maybe some threat that's. And then you take Ahsoka, The Mandalorian, any other series that they create that take this time period, and maybe that's the plot of the film. Remember, Filoni said that he wanted to make a movie where he ties. It's almost like the Avengers. You take all these
Mhm.
individual standalone series and then you tie it together with a film. Maybe they're the big bad guys of the film.
That could be. That could be true. Um, yeah, I think Ahsoka, and I think if you bring her. I think if you bring the Yuuzhan Vong into Ahsoka, it wouldn't even be a match. because we know from the books that Luke Skywalker had issues. He's infinitely more powerful than Ahsoka. So it's just like, what is Ahsoka really gonna do? And the Ghost and Sabine, and you know what I mean? It's kind of like
Well, I don't know. Sabine might, there might be some crazy like weakness or something, and Sabine's the only one that can find it. Because the other
because they got some
problem,
artwork on them.
yeah, right, exactly, figured out through the art or something stupid like that. I mean, because here's the problem and this goes into the other part of the discussion too, is that how much of this do you make this about the hardcore fan versus the casual? Now, the one positive thing that I can say, and again, if you guys missed our review of the first 2 episodes of Ahsoka, they're up there. They're ready for you guys to watch. There's actually quite a spirited, lively discussion with everybody in our community, too. So you definitely want to check that out. But one of the things that we brought up was the fact that Lucasfilm seems to be now swinging the pendulum another way. They seem to be swinging it a little bit more towards the hardcore fan because, as we stated, and look, like I said before, I've watched a ton of reviews, read a bunch of stuff. I wanted to get a feel for what people were thinking when it comes to the series. And everybody universally agrees that, if you've never watched Rebels or the Clone Wars, you're going to be completely lost in that series. And in fact, one of the things, and I didn't actually bring this up during the show, it was in my notes to bring up, but I didn't really get a chance to do it. And that was one of my criticisms of the show was that it focused more on Sabine than Ahsoka. And if you were a casual fan, you would think that the show was about Sabine. It's only because as a more hardcore fan, as somebody who's watched Rebels, as somebody who's watched... See, if you've seen Rebels, then Ahsoka episodes 1 and 2 make perfect sense. There's a little bit of a focus on Sabine, but it's not... You understand where everybody fits in the overall galaxy, but honestly,
Right.
if you were a casual fan and you're watching this show called Ahsoka, and like nearly everything is about Sabine and her challenges and her stuff, you'd be lost. And so you can't really bring something like the Yuuzhan Vong into something that's going to further, dilute the everything else. You almost have to save them for
Yeah.
a bigger project that maybe
Yeah.
incorporates all these other characters.
No, yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that's one of those things that um I would love to see them. I would love to see them, and I think they using Vaughn. They deserve a film. I think that's the proper way to bring them into Star Wars canon. I mean, in the sense of visually, is to really bring them into the screen, the big screen, because they're such a huge, formidable characters. And I mean, like I said, they took out like what 20, you said 23, 24 books. So I mean, their reign was very prominent. So I think that will be better suited in that regard. Now, if they do it with Ray and Poe and Finn, I think that would be a great. I think that would be a great way um, to give Ray and that crew some validity. Because I
Absolutely.
think what happens with a lot of Star Wars fans is like when we're looking at, like, all right, you're trying to make us, or Lucasfilm is trying to make us accept Ray, Foe, and Finn as the
Foe.
new,
I like Foe.
yeah, Foe and Penn.
Foe and Pin.
But no, for Poe and Finn, um, you want us to accept them as the new crew. Like, okay, the new Han, Luke, and Leia. That's fine. And in a way, they tried to make it like, okay, they kind of went up against a similar situations that Han, Luke, and Leia did, where they came up against a Vader-like character, and then they still had to contend with the Emperor, just like Han, Luke, and Leia had to.
I was going to say, some would think too similar.
Yes, and but at the problem with that is just a lot of it wasn't justified, or as David would say, it wasn't earned, in my opinion.
Oh, none of it was earned.
Um,
That's actually a really good
yeah,
way of putting it because none of you know, the whole time there was really no tension, there was no suspense, nothing was really earned. I mean, Luke, Han, Leia, they earned what happened to them.
earned,
They went
yeah,
through, legitimate things. I mean, there's just a lot of lazy storytelling in the sequel trilogy. That's the problem. And as a result, everything just came too easy to them.
yeah, and it's no different than watching, for those, who grew up watching in WWF, like I did, it's like, okay, you have all these characters and you have like the job of these wrestlers are to make you believe that these characters, they are who these characters are.
Hmm.
Now, some people actually like, somebody like Ric Flair took it to the nth degree. Like what you saw on screen or on Saturday nights or Saturday mornings, like that was really Ric Flair. That's really the character. He lived that life. So the stuff that he would say in his promos, that's who he was. But you believed the Undertaker was the Undertaker because the way he took into consideration everything, the way he walked, the way he took off everything, you believed that character. And so that's what it comes to Star Wars, is like you have to believe, we have to, as the fans, have to believe that, okay, Ray really can save the day. We really have to believe that Han is really that cool. You know what I mean? He's just that kind of, it's whatever. You know, that cocky guy, like that guy with the swagger. Like you have now, I think Oscar Isaac did a good job with it with Poe, as far as bringing, not trying to be Han Solo, but just bringing his own version of that and just being that kind of cocky, you know, leader or whatever. But we Finn was completely mismanaged. So it's like we have to kind of rebrand him and try to figure out what the heck is he? Is he just a scaredy cat the whole time? Because the whole movie, he's pretty much throughout the whole trilogy, he's trying to run from everything. And it's like, okay, we never really see him truly step up. And then,
Well, here's the thing. We
mhm.
did, and then they ruined it. At the end of The Last Jedi, he finally, that was the story arc. I mean, if you really follow through on good
Oh, you
storytelling,
talking about when he tried to run
yeah,
into
when he was going to
the
run
little
into the
cannon?
laser or something, it was kind of like, you know what? I finally get it now. I'm going to stand up. I'm going to sacrifice myself for my friends. It was like this beautiful story arc, but of course they didn't want to kill
Hmm.
him off, so they cheapened it. But it was
Hmm.
that's the problem the sequel trilogy had. Anytime that they did anything that was actually good, kind of like you said, even with Finn specifically, right? I mean, here you have what is on paper a completely compelling character. You have a stormtrooper who basically defects.
Yep.
That's something we've never seen before. I mean,
Right.
stormtroopers are barely human to us, much less
Exactly.
you
So
get a
they already
guy,
humanized him.
right? Not only do they humanize him, but they give him this whole emotional arc, that this whole thing, and then they waste it. They completely waste it
Hmm.
and mismanage it. And then they start to redeem it by, okay, here's a guy who's running away from everything. Now he's going to step up. And now he gets saved by this woman who decides she loves him. These two have zero chemistry whatsoever. Like nobody's buying
Hmm.
into it, including the character
Right.
himself.
Right.
I mean,
And
it's
then when we
mind blowing how
then you
they
go to
did
the
this.
follow to follow that up, then you go to the next movie, and then there's nothing between them at
Zero.
all.
It's
So
almost
it's
like they
like, what was
barely
that
know
for?
each other. Right. What was that
Yeah,
for?
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So that was useless for us. So, and that's what I mean. It says, of course, we're not even gonna talk about the other wasted characters like Captain Phasma, who look, that was another waste of character. So, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't want that to happen to the Yuuzhan Vong. And that's why I feel like, if you now give them somewhat of a strategy, because now I think this will be more of a test for them. If you gave them the Yuuzhan Vong, okay, it's definitely now a put up or shut up thing for Ray, because now Luke's gone. I mean, he'll probably pop up as the Force goes and, have a couple of words with her or something like that. but now we have to really like Ray really truly has to carry the show now. And then
Hmm.
Poe, we already know Oscar Isaac. I mean, if he decides to come back, you know, then it's like okay, but then what are you going to do with Finn? Like, and that's where I feel like that's going to be the equalizer. You're going to have to make Finn just like a strategist or something, the guy who just kind of takes on the military aspect of things. Like, you know what? I've been a stormtrooper. I know how to, I know how regimes and armies work. Let me take that role and then become more of a general in that regard and let him show some gravitas in that. And then maybe that might be a cool thing of watching um those characters go on and create their own Star Wars empire. No pun intended. But um, as far as Ahsoka, I mean, yeah, as far as Ahsoka having to deal with the Yuuzhan Vong, um, I don't see that. That would be too. It's almost like too easy. It's like taking candy from a baby at that point. Like there will be no one to really stop them.
Well, not to mention the fact, I mean, a lot of this is somewhat of a moot point. I mean, they obviously have shot the whole thing, so it's
Right.
now. I think what we're talking about though is more like a season 2
A couple of
or a
seasons,
season
like
3
season
or
or yeah,
4 or
down the
whatever,
line. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, the thing is, so yeah, we pretty much agree that maybe the Yuuzhan Vong's a little bit too big for Ahsoka. Not just the
Hmm.
character herself to deal with, and this particularly group of characters or whatever, but again, if they were going to bring it, I would say like introduce them maybe, if anything. And this is true with any of the series. They could introduce them in the season 4 of The Mandalorian. And then everybody has to come together. It's almost like the Yuuzhan Vong becomes the Thanos of
I was
the
just
Avengers thing.
yeah. I was even thinking like, yeah, that would be cool. Is let's just say, for example, in let's say the series finale, let's just say, all right, Ahsoka and them maybe have to they're in the unknown regions doing stuff or whatever the case may be, and then they come back to the more known galaxy with Tatooine and Coruscant and everything is. But while they're out there, the Yusuf Vaughn becomes aware of them. Like, hey, who the heck were these guys? And it's piqued their curiosity, and now they're coming towards um the known galaxy to now figure out to explore and trying to figure out like, okay, well, we haven't seen these people out here before. Where did they come from? It's almost like a reverse Star Trek type thing. Like, well, now they're trying to explore and see who we are. And that could be the tease into something. And so now when you decide to do the movie, now they're getting closer to the timeline of, well, not the timeline, but the space of where we know Star Wars to
Right. It's
usually
almost
reside.
like over a bunch of series, maybe it's like, oh, well, these new guys are here now, and now they're there, and now they're. It's almost like the closer they get in, and maybe they're
Hmm.
destroying outposts or something, and it's like, okay, now we make the movie where we actually have to finally deal with them.
Hmm.
And that's possible because honestly, that's how Vector Prime was. Vector Prime still stands as one of the best, I think, Star Wars books, but certainly within the New Jedi Order series, because it was one of those things where, it's almost no different than, say some of these disaster movies, like Day After Tomorrow or, Volcano or any of these other things, right? Where there's
Hmm.
there's hints of things that are going wrong and people are seeing it, but they're not putting together the full threat that
The
it
magnitude of it
possesses.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then by the time they realize what
It's too
shape
late.
they're actually in, it's too late. And that's a lot how Vector Prime was written. Again, this thing came out in 99, so it's been a minute since I read it, but I do remember
Hmm.
elements of it. It was they had like some envoy or something that they would, they started to make contact with us and pretending to be somewhat benign and all this other stuff. And then because they didn't know anything about us, right? So us like I'm part of the Star Wars universe now, but I mean,
Right.
they didn't really
I get it.
understand. And, they started getting turned off by things like, oh, you guys are kind of a technological society, and that's sort of blasphemous to us. And, eventually it's like, you know what?
Mhm.
We kind of all talked and decided you all have to go. And that's sort
Yeah,
of
you
what
guys
it
aren't fit
was.
to live.
Yeah, they were
Right.
very deceptive. It was very much like the series V, where in V, the aliens came and they're all pretending to be our friends. And look, here's a cure for cancer, and here's this, and oh, we're gonna start a little youth organization, and it had a little bit of Nazi imagery in there too. But the point is, they were pretending to be our friends when in reality they were really farming us for food, and they also needed our water. So, and it was by the time everybody found out what was really going on, it was too late. And that's what happened with the Yuuzhan Vong. They started to, they would attend some of the New Republic, hearings or whatever, like Senate meetings or whatever. And
Mhm.
they would, there was some dialogue there, and, they were sending envoys and stuff. And of course, in the meantime, they were undermining everything. They were running these secret missions. They were getting reconnaissance. They were starting to get a foothold. Like at first, they started getting all this stuff in the outer rim and in the unknown regions. They kind of went to the unknown regions and the outer rim, and they were becoming an issue. And it was like, okay, these guys are really starting to become a problem. And by the middle of the series, it was getting so bad. And, there was just all kinds of different things going on. Because you had Jason, you had Jaina, you had basically the Sith acolytes. That's sort of like that concept in The Rise of Skywalker. That really started in this new Jedi Order series. But you had all this other stuff. But I mean, if you just stick with the main storyline of the whole thing, one of the things that was happening was there was a point where obviously Thrawn was long gone at this point, but Paleon was now the Grand Admiral. And there had been a treaty, and this is a holdover from one of the other expanded universe books, that basically it's like, okay, we're going to give the Empire this territory in the Outer Rim. And that could be
Mhm.
yours to do whatever you want. You leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. And that's how it
Mhm.
was for, how many ever years. Well, finally, the New Republic was getting their butts just handed to them by the Yuuzhan Vong in battle after battle. They're losing territory after territory. Planets were starting to fall. They were either being destroyed or they were falling into Yuuzhan Vong hands to where they would be colonized by them. And they were starting to make their way towards Coruscant and the inner planets. And that's when the
Mhm.
New Republic started freaking out. So Leia ended up reaching to Paleon because they kind of had an uneasy little like friendship, sorta.
Mhm.
I mean, they were still technically kind of, but they were, you know, they were
I don't
frenemies.
completely trust you.
Yeah,
Yes.
they were basically frenemies, and pretty much she reached out to Paleon saying, "Listen, you gotta commit the Empire to this thing because we're basically like having our butts handed to us over here." And Paleon's like, "Well, hey, they're not bothering us. It's your problem. You wanted to run the galaxy. There you go." And her retort
Mhm.
was like, "Well, it's only a matter of time before they come after you. I mean, if you don't help us now, they're going to get more of a foothold and they're not going to leave you alone." And
Mhm.
it went like that for some time until they started attacking the Empire stuff. And now the Empire's like, crap, we should have actually gotten into this a lot earlier. And then, of course, there were some really cool, things like a lot of the upper guys in the Empire when they're all talking and, strategizing. And one of them ends up going, yeah, man, if Palpatine were still around, he would show
Yeah,
these
this is
guys, this wouldn't be happening to us.
Yeah.
But so it was kind of cool to, read that because, of course, at that time, Palpatine wasn't anywhere near
Right,
returning or
right.
anything like that. But, the basic thing was that it was a slow process. But with Vector Prime, it was the beginnings of that to where the threat was minor. Nobody was paying attention to it. And they could start that out. They could do a Vector Prime like thing in Ahsoka, in The Mandalorian, in something like that. And then with each season, sure, you have whatever story arc you're dealing with, but then maybe then you reference, maybe there's a little news report in the background of something. The Yuuzhan Vong have conquered another planet and, that kind of thing. Until it gets to the point to where our heroes would logically have to deal with the situation. And then that's when you pull the trigger on the film.
Yeah.
But here's another question. Doesn't have to be the Yuuzhan Vong, because you do have the Grisk. And the Grisk are pretty much similar. I mean, if I didn't know better, I would swear it was Zahn, because I think he's the one that came up with these guys. I'm not sure. Actually, let me see. I have to find out where they appeared. Yeah, so they were. Okay, it's what I thought. So they were Zahn's creation, and they made their first appearance in the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. And they're very much, it would not surprise me in the least if Timothy Zahn looked at the Yuuzhan Vong and pretty much created a new canon version of them. They're not quite as extreme. It's not quite, they're sort of a little bit more, like, it's just not as extreme. But they're very much in the way they look, in the way they act, just the way they are. They're very much like a Yuuzhan Vong stand-in.
Okay.
And because they started in the whole Thrawn stuff, that would be a natural gateway to bring them into Ahsoka.
Yeah, I mean that could be, a definite move. But we can't say for sure though. Like, I think you and I are both in agreement that Yuuzhan Vong should not be in Ahsoka,
No, I mean, like I said, and I think,
unless it's a tease. Unless you're
well,
gonna
that's
tease
it. I think both of us would add to that if they wanted to just mention the name, or, sort of a very soft introduction, then yeah, that would be cool. Because that's something that they could do now, and then they wouldn't have to do anything about it for how many ever projects, right? You could just say,
Right.
well, I mean, the Yuuzhan Vong, or some weird little reference to them. Well, that doesn't necessarily have to mean that they have to appear in the next season of Ahsoka or something in Mandalorian. I mean, it could be like 10 years from now, that they finally get around to doing something. But if you just wanted to put that out there, yes. To actually fold and bring them into the show, into 2, 3, even 4, I don't know. Filoni usually likes to go like 4 or 5 seasons. That seems to be his sweet spot. So we'll see. We actually don't know, because you haven't read anything about how long they want to go with Ahsoka yet, have you?
No.
So probably 4, maybe, might be a sweet spot.
Yep. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, we'll just have to keep an eye on it and check it out. But in the meantime, let us know what you guys think. I wanted to read the results so far of this poll that we have. Now, of course, at the time we're recording this, I put up a poll that said, do you like the Ahsoka series so far? And I basically gave one of 4 responses. I gave you guys a little bit. It's not just like a yes or no thing. I tried to get a little bit of nuances here. So I put 4 responses. Either yes, it's fantastic. It's okay. It has some issues, but I'm enjoying it. No, it's another example of Disney ruining Star Wars. Or not even interested. The only real Star Wars is Lucas's Star Wars. So interesting, the votes that we've gotten so far. And again, by the time that this episode is airing on Monday, it might be a little different. So, I'll have to definitely keep everybody apprised. Because I'm also going to throw up this Yuuzhan Vong thing, too. I want to put that in the community, and I'll probably put that in our Twitter as well. But so far, 67% are saying, yes, it's fantastic. And 33% are saying, no, it's another example of Disney ruining Star Wars. So very, very polarized views. Nobody's saying it's okay. Nobody's saying, I'm not even really interested. It's either yes, I'm really digging it, or no, this
or a
is
hard
horrible.
no.
Yeah. So, we're just going to have to keep an eye on it. And of course, this Friday, it'll be another pre-recorded episode. I mean, unless the only way that'll change is if I get a little bit of if I figure out that maybe, because I will say, there is a possibility that this Friday will be a live show. It's just we have to look at what's going on with their schedules because, again, there's festival, all kinds of stuff happening that, we're basically working. So that's what's going to determine it. But there is a chance that this Friday could be live. But if not, it'll be pre-recorded, and we're going to go over episode 3 of Ahsoka and see where this next episode's taking us. Of course, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. That, of course, helps. Again, I want to welcome all the new subscribers and everybody. I mean, people are starting to catch on to the show, and that's great. Definitely share the links to the show with your friends, help grow the community. If you want to help us a little bit more, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/headtoheadsw and maybe give us a couple of bucks, or you can even join a membership program, at the Padawan level, Jedi Knight level, Jedi Master level, and you get a couple of these perks. Obviously, it's not necessary, but it does actually help this channel because we are looking to grow it. So, yeah, I think once again, we're pretty much at an interesting time in the Star Wars universe again. There's stuff to talk about now, which is great.
Definitely.
All right.
That's definitely fun.
Yeah. So, again, watch for the polls that are coming on our community tab. If you haven't joined our Discord channel, join that because we got all kinds of stuff going on there. Our Twitter, @headtoheadsw, although it's called X now, so I don't even know what that means. Like, I don't know if I know what Elon Musk is trying to do. He's trying to, what's it called? There's like there's like this service in China and a lot in Asia. It's called like WeChat or something like that, where it's sort of a catch-all. It's actually a lot like Discord that way. And what Elon is trying to do is he's trying to create this new platform that ends up becoming a catch-all for every type of social media interaction. And that's why he rebranded Twitter into X.
I thought that's what the metaverse was about, but okay.
The metaverse is Facebook. That's Zuckerberg. So Mark Zuckerberg took Facebook, Instagram, which they had purchased, the new Twitter competition they have called Threads, and he just calls it Meta, right? That's kind of the big thing. And then when Elon bought Twitter, now he's trying to mirror this whole thing that's happening that's really big in Asia, called WeChat. And so he's trying to shift things and rebrand things. But of course, so eventually I'm probably going to change this Twitter logo that we got into the X logo and stuff like that. I don't exactly know, like, what do you say? I X'd today? I mean, it sounds a little, little mildly, X-rated, no pun intended. But, I mean, it was much easier when it was Twitter, and yes, I put up a tweet, I tweeted. It's like, I don't really know yet what the accepted language is for this new X platform, but you can find us there. The point is, you can find us there.
You say, I could see if someone said, I was on X today, and it's like, are you talking about ecstasy or the actual social media
Right. See,
platform?
and that's the problem. He has to come up with some sort of a language that doesn't sound like I'm doing something illegal. Where I'm going to be investigated. Well, hey, I mean, I guess if the government wants our information, that's a really good way to get it. But you can find us there at head-to-head-SW. I mean, you can see even in our little overlay here, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at head-to-head-SW. And I'm going to put up some more polls on Twitter as well. Definitely join in, and, we can chat there. The Discord, there's all kinds of places to reach us now. So until this Friday, of course, we're both looking forward to tomorrow's episode of Ahsoka. Hopefully it continues on a nice upward trajectory and we're not tearing into it, kind of like we were Friday. But That remains to be seen. So until Friday, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at head-to-head-SW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at head-to-head-swpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.